Hey Jeremy, welcome. How you going?
I'm well.
That's fantastic. Well, here we are on another edition of Scooter Talk with Jeremy. That's that time of the month where we talk about all things scootering. So, hi and welcome Jeremy again.
Thank you, Alan.
Thanks for your time today, and what have you got in store for us?
Well, I thought today we'd look at brakes and braking systems, because twist and go is a great thing, but learning how to stop is even better.
Fantastic. Well, how about before we look at the art of braking, we have a look at the different types of brakes that are around?
Okay, Alan. Basically, with scooters, you have disc brakes and drum brakes. They're two very different sorts of things in terms of operation and how they work. So let's take a look.
Yeah, how about I leave you to chat about it?
Drum brakes. Here we have the rear drum from a Bowdler Jet 100 scooter. The drum brake is made up of several parts. The first is a drum inside the wheel hub, which has inside that two internally expanding curved brake shoes, which are operated by a cam system operated by the brake lever. Now, it's a very efficient system. It's particularly good for wet weather because you don't get water inside the brake drum, which means that the brakes operate the same in the dry as in the wet. But the first thing to remember about them is that adjustment is very important. An adjustment is usually done here by a threaded rod with a nut or a knurled knob. Now, the easy way to adjust it is just to turn the nut or the knob so that when the wheel can spin freely, but when the brake is applied, it stops. That pretty much summarises drum brakes, so now we'll move on to the front of the scooter and the disc. Disc brake, it's fairly obviously a disc, metal disc attached to the rim, to the hub of the wheel, which spins as the wheel spins. This is clamped by a caliper, which has brake pads inside that, operated by a hydraulic system. Now, brake pads are generally self-adjusting, so you don't need to touch them except at service time. That pretty much sums up disc brakes. Very simple, very effective. But in the wet, they can have a little bit of lag, which is why you'll see these holes here, which are designed to clear water from the disc surface when it's raining. But apart from that, they're set and forget. Okay, so we've looked at the different sorts of brakes, disc and drum, and while some scooters will have a disc at the front and a disc at the back, some will have a drum at the front and a drum at the back, or a disc at the front or a drum at the back. The thing they all have in common is that, just like bicycles, the left-hand brake lever operates the rear brake, the right-hand brake lever operates the front. Now, the brakes do different things. But firstly, let's look at your hand positioning. A lot of people will think that riding around with their fingers resting on the brakes will give them a better response time when there's an incident or they have to make emergency braking. This is not necessarily true. And the reason this is not necessarily true is that the thing you want to avoid is jamming the brakes on as fast as possible. The reason for that is that can lead to what most people who ride a scooter for the first time are terrified of: locking up the wheels. And the reason it locks up the wheels is that when you hit the brakes quickly, the suspension compresses to take account of the inertia. It runs out of travel, you can hit a bump, the wheel will bounce off the ground, lock, come back down again, and you'll fall off, or at least lock the wheels. That's to be avoided, and one of the best ways of avoiding it is to ride with your hands on the grips, so that when you have to brake, the time lag between taking your hands off and hitting the brakes allows you not to make a panic stop. So, once you're riding along with your hands on the grips nice and easily, the best way to get the most out of the brakes is a little trick called setting up and squeezing. Now, we've seen how panic grab can cause lock-up problems. Setting up and squeezing is a much better way of braking because it allows you to use the brakes to their fullest extent. And the way you do it is that you just lightly caress the brake lever, pull it in slightly to set up the brakes. What that does is it takes the travel out of the suspension, allows the weight to transfer, and then the suspension to settle itself back down, and then you can squeeze almost as hard as you like, almost back to the bars. And what happens then is that the contact patch of the front tyre starts to squash, starts to flatten out, which gives you more rubber on the road, and that means more braking power. It's very important to set up and squeeze. But one of the questions that we get a lot is, but that takes too long. I have to stop. There's a car in front of me. It takes a fraction of a second if you do it properly. And the way to do it properly is to do any of the scooter licensing courses or advanced rider training, because setting up and squeezing and braking is one of the key elements of the curriculum. They'll take you through that. It's worth the price of admission for any of those courses just to learn how to use the brakes properly. It gives you much more confidence, you'll be safer, you'll be happier, and you'll enjoy scootering a lot more. Okay, so why do we need two brakes? Because they do different things. On a motorcycle, some 80% of the braking force is applied using the front brake. That's because the weight transference and suspension travel are slightly different. With a scooter, because the engine's in the back and you're sitting more upright, the weight distribution is much different. So the rear brake assumes a lot more importance than on a motorcycle. They still work together, but they work separately. Generally, when I'm riding in traffic, I find the front brake is good just to slow me down. If I need to stop, I'll apply the front brake to slow down, get rid of the weight transference, set up, and then I'll use the rear brake to stop. Part of the reason for that is that if there is an accidental lock-up, the rear is far more controllable than the front. The scooter will generally take care of itself if the rear wheel locks up, so that's fine. Another difference between the brakes is that they can be used for steering. Now, I know that sounds strange to begin with, but if you can imagine a tyre having 100% grip, some of that grip is used, say 80% of that grip is used in cornering, with 20% left over for braking. Front tyre uses most of its grip in cornering, so you don't want to hit the front brake when you're in the middle of a corner. Rear brake, on the other hand, doesn't have quite so much of an impact. What will happen if you use the rear brake in a corner? It will tighten your line, which means you will turn further into the corner. So if you feel like you're running wide, if you feel like you're a little bit too quick into a corner, a little bit of rear brake will often sort you out. The other thing rear brake in corners does is that it lets a little bit of weight transference go to the front, which is why it tightens the line, but it also stops the front end from feeling like it wants to run wide or pushing. So when you hear us talking about pushing the front, a little bit of rear brake will stop that feeling and make you feel a lot more confident in the middle of corners. Now, I understand if that sounds a little bit too technical, if you're a novice rider or not very confident about what you're doing. I guess the basic rule to remember is always to use both brakes in conjunction with each other and to experiment. Try using the front brake first, then the rear brake, try using the rear brake, then the front brake, but do it safely at a speed that you're comfortable with when there's no traffic around. The same goes with braking in corners. Try it. You don't want to jam the brake on, you just want it to operate just a little bit, just to take the edge off your speed. Practice it, and practice it. That's the best thing about braking. Well, I hope that's cleared up some of the misconceptions and some of the apprehensions you may have had about braking. Just to sum up, you've got a brake at the front, a brake at the rear, two controls which do slightly different things, but operated together brings you to a safe and stable halt. The important thing to remember with braking is to practice it and practice it so that when you need it, it's a skill that you have at your fingertips.
Hey, well, that was great advice, mate. Well done.
Thanks,
well
Alan.
done. There's a lot of information there to obviously stomach, isn't there? Because braking is, well, as we call it, the art of braking. So thank you once again for your time today, Jeremy. And
It's a pleasure, Alan.
you know, that was another edition of Scooter Talk with Jeremy, and these are very valuable in terms of learning, you know, the techniques of riding a scooter. So thanks once again for your time. We'll see you next time on Scooter Talk with Jeremy.
Thanks, Alan.